Snow had started falling by the time I reached Camilla's home in Portland's West End. The old colonial house glowed with warm light. The kind of light I used to imagine meant safety. My arms were full, carefully wrapped gifts for Lena and Caleb, and a bottle of Bordeaux from 1985, the one Henry and I had saved for a special occasion. I thought this Christmas would be it. The front door swung open, and my grandchildren rushed at me, their laughter spilling into the cold night. Caleb grabbed one of the boxes from my hands, insisting he could carry it himself, while Lena hugged me tightly around the waist. For a moment, I felt the ache of missing Henry soften. Inside, the house smelled of roasted duck and cloves. Ethan appeared from the dining room, his greeting polite but restrained. He pressed a quick kiss to my cheek before disappearing back toward the kitchen. Then Camilla came. Her smile was thin, eyes flicking past me toward the dining room. "You made it," she said, voice already taut. I followed her gaze and saw Margot Hastings, Ethan's mother, sitting comfortably in the parlor chair, her posture regal, her face unreadable. Dinner was called soon after. We gathered around the long mahogany table dressed with white linen and crystal glasses. I moved to my usual place at the head, the seat Henry had always reserved for me after his passing. For years, that spot symbolized continuity, my role as mother and elder, still steady. Camilla's hand froze on her wine glass. She stared at me as though I had trespassed. "Mother," she said, her voice flat at first. "Get up. That seat belongs to my mother-in-law." The room quieted. I kept my tone measured. "Camilla, I've always sat here. This is where your father wanted me." Her face twisted, fury she didn't bother to hide. I said, "Get up," before I could steady myself. Her hands shoved hard against my shoulder. At 64, my body no longer had the strength to catch the fall. I landed on the polished hardwood with a crack that echoed through the room. Lena screamed my name. Caleb froze, eyes wide. Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came. Margot merely tilted her head, the corner of her lip curling ever so slightly. From the floor, pain radiating through my hip, I heard my daughter's voice, sharp and merciless. "This is Margot's place. Out." Something inside me broke, but it was not my bones. It was the last fragile thread of trust I had held onto. I rose slowly, gripping the edge of the table, and walked toward the stairs, leaving behind the chair that no longer felt like mine. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step sending a sharp reminder through my knees. I murmured something about needing the bathroom, though no one dared stop me. Behind the heavy oak door, I turned the lock and pressed my back against it, letting the silence swallow the echo of Camilla's words. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the sting, not only in my hip, but in my heart. Then habit, honed over decades of running a business with Henry, took over. I sat on the edge of the porcelain tub, pulled my phone from my bag, and dialed Arthur Bell. He answered groggily. Christmas Eve had caught him at home. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Arthur, prepare documents first thing tomorrow. Revoke every authority Camilla has over the Carter Properties LLC. All 3 rentals are to be solely under my control. Draft the amendments tonight if you can." He hesitated, then agreed. He had heard that tone from me before. Next, I called Ruth Keene. She had balanced our ledgers for 25 years, seen us through recessions and recoveries. "Ruth, I need you to freeze every joint credit line linked to Camilla and Ethan. Suspend distributions from the LLC accounts. Review all guarantees I've signed for them. Mortgage, auto, cards. I want them off by dawn." Her intake of breath was sharp, but she promised to begin immediately. When the calls ended, I placed the phone on the counter and met my reflection. My lipstick had smeared from the fall, a faint bruise already forming at my temple. But my eyes, they were steady, sharper than they had been in years. "You pushed me down," I whispered to the woman in the mirror, voice low but firm. I'll stand up higher than ever. And up. I smoothed my blouse, gathered myself, and unlocked the door. The voices downstairs rose and fell in brittle laughter, but I moved past them without pause, stepping out into the cold night air with a plan already forming. By the time I reached my apartment overlooking Back Cove, the snow had thickened, muting the city into silence. I set down the Bordeaux, unopened, beside the stack of ledgers I hadn't touched in years. The familiar oak desk creaked as I pulled out the chair and spread the papers like pieces of a puzzle I already knew by heart. Passwords, account numbers, property deeds my fingertips remembered where everything belonged. I opened my laptop and logged into the LLC portal. With each digital signature, Camilla's authority dissolved. No more access to the rental income, no more right to claim decisions over houses Henry and I had bled to preserve. By 2 a.m, every account linked to her name flashed suspended. Arthur's email came next. Draft amendments to my will attached as PDFs. His message was brief, professional, but I could almost hear his steady voice beneath the words. Are you sure I didn't hesitate? Camilla was removed as executor. Lena and Caleb, my 2 true heirs, were written in her place. Their names glowed on the screen, bright as a promise. At 3, Ruth called. Her tone was crisp despite the hour. The Lexus lease Ethan drives secured under your personal guarantee. Same for Camilla's revolving credit line. Both will be revoked at dawn. Good, I told her. The word tasting of steel. I clicked through one more set of documents. The hum of the radiator filling the room as if Henry were still pacing behind me. For the first time since he passed, I felt him near, not in grief, but in resolve. What I did tonight wasn't vengeance. It was consequence. I leaned back, exhaling for what felt like the first time in hours. Power, not the loud, blustering kind, but the quiet weight of control returned to my chest. The oak desk beneath my palms felt steady, unshaken, as though it knew the battle wasn't about to begin. It had already started. Outside, the snow thickened over Portland, blanketing the city in stillness, while inside my apartment, the paper trail I laid down would carry into morning. Christmas morning broke with a gray sky over Portland. But inside my apartment, it was quiet. I sipped coffee at my kitchen table, watching gulls wheel over Back Cove. I knew by then the machinery I had set in motion was already grinding into place. Across town, Camilla's day unraveled with the sound of her phone. One call after another stacked upon each other until the device vibrated nonstop on the counter. By the time she looked down, the screen flashed 58 missed calls. Banks, credit card companies, leasing offices, each one demanding answers she could not give. At 9, her corporate Amex was declined at a pharmacy. At 10, a tow truck arrived in front of her West End house and hauled away the silver Lexus, the same one Ethan boasted about every holiday. Neighbors peeked through frosted windows as the car was winched onto the flatbed. By noon, certified mail slipped through their slot foreclosure notices for the Ogunquit condo, the place they had called their escape. I did not need to be there to see her panic. I imagined her rushing from room to room, calling Ethan, calling Margot, only to meet silence or blame. I imagined her eyes narrowing when she realized there was only one person who could have pulled the rug out so swiftly. Near mid-afternoon, the buzzer to my building sounded. I stayed where I was. Minutes later, the thud of fists on the lobby door echoed up the stairwell. When that failed, Camilla climbed the steps to my floor, her heels striking like hammers. But when she reached my door, she found the access code changed. Where once she strode in freely, now the keypad blinked red. taped just above it was a single note in Arthur's unmistakable hand. "This office is not for you." I knew the words would slice deeper than any argument. Camilla pounded the door until her fists tired, her voice a muffled storm against the wood. Then silence followed, heavy and reluctant. For the first time, she would have to face what she had always dismissed, that her mother was not weak. And the seat she had pushed me from was never hers to give away. That afternoon I walked through Deering Oaks Park, the snow packed firm beneath my boots. The playground swings creaked in the cold wind, and on a bench near the frozen pond, Lena and Caleb waited. Their cheeks were red from the chill, but the moment they saw me, they ran forward. Arms outstretched, I held them close, breathing in the familiar scent of wool scarves and cocoa. Their warmth softened something inside me that the night before had cracked. We sat together, their mittened hands clasped around mine, and I braced for the questions I knew would come. "Grandma," Lena said quietly, "why did you leave so fast last night? We didn't even open presents." I smoothed back her hair, choosing my words with care. "Sometimes adults make mistakes. Sweetheart, I didn't want you to see any more of that, but listen to me, it is not your fault. Nothing that happened was because of you. I love you both the same as always." Caleb leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom pushed you." Why the air seemed to still around us, his eyes searched mine. Looking for a truth he was too young to bear. I swallowed the ache in my throat. "That's something between the grown-ups, Caleb. What matters is, I'm here for you. Always." I wrapped my arms around them both, pressing them close until I could feel their hearts beating against me. They were my true heirs, not of property or money, but of love that no betrayal could strip away. We sat like that for a long while, until their questions faded into the sound of sleds scraping over snow and children shouting across the park. I let them chatter about school and their dog, grateful for their ability to return to innocence. Across town, Camilla's house was filled with raised voices. Ethan's patience had thinned under the weight of repossessions and calls from creditors. Margot, never one to waste words, dealt the harshest blow. "Respect," she told Camilla, "is earned, not inherited." Even Camilla, for once, had no reply. The words settled over her like frost, sharp and undeniable. By evening, I returned to my apartment, the echo of my grandchildren's voices still warming the silence as I began to plan my next step. The days after Christmas passed with a strange stillness in my apartment, but beyond my windows, storms gathered around Camilla. By the morning of the 26th, the banks had followed through. Letters stamped "final notice" arrived at her door before the wreath had even been taken down. Creditors called from every corner, each one circling like a hawk over what they now knew was unsecured debt. Her friends in the West End, women who had once praised her parties and envied her vacations, began to whisper. Portland is a small city. News traveled faster than the snowplows on Congress Street. How could Camilla have let her own mother undo her so quickly? The gossip wasn't about me. It was about her weakness, her arrogance, and the sudden cracks in the image she had worked so hard to maintain. Ethan, embarrassed by the spectacle, pulled inward. He buried himself in late hours at his firm, though hiding there gave him little protection. Human Resources filed a conflict of interest memo after reviewing the paper trail of Camilla's involvement in the LLC. The Hastings reputation, polished for generations, trembled under the weight of questions no lawyer could easily answer. Margot, too, drew back. I heard from Ruth that she had refused to intervene on Camilla's behalf, saying only that weakness repelled her more than poverty. That cut deeper than any bank notice could have. Camilla, stripped of allies, told anyone who would listen that it was all a misunderstanding. But even in her own voice, the word rang hollow. Through it all, I kept my silence. I did not answer questions from neighbors or return calls from curious acquaintances. Outwardly, I was the same woman I had always been measured. Quiet, polite, inwardly, I combed through every document I had signed for her over the years. Mortgages, credit cards, vehicles, even the Ogunquit condo all bore my name as surety. One by one, I signed the cancellations. Each revocation felt like turning a key in a lock. Each lock meant one more door closed to manipulation. One more wall restored around the life Henry and I had built. By the evening of the 28th, the stack of completed forms lay neatly on my desk, waiting for morning delivery, and I felt the weight of years lift as I prepared for what came next. By the end of December, the noise around Camilla had dulled into a steady hum of consequences. Yet in the quiet of my apartment, I wrestled with something far heavier than her debts. My hand hovered over the page as I began to write. The letter was plain, no flourishes. Just the truth set down in my own script. I laid out what reconciliation would require if she ever sought it. First, an apology one spoken without excuses. Second, a repayment plan, not for every dollar I had covered, but for the principle that nothing in life comes free. Third, counseling, so the anger that had driven her to push me could be named and confronted. Fourth, clear boundaries. Margot Hastings would never again have influence over family matters. And finally, she would never use Lena and Caleb as pawns, never force them to bear the weight of conflicts they did not create. I read it once, then twice. Each line was measured. Firm, but not cruel. It was not punishment. It was a path, narrow though it might be, that could lead back if she chose to walk it. But I did not fold the letter into an envelope for her. Instead, I carried it to Arthur's office. He looked at me over his glasses as I slid the paper across the desk. "Keep this," I told him. "If she ever asks what it would take, give it to her. Otherwise, it stays in your drawer." That night, I sat by my window overlooking the cove. The letter's words still etched into my mind. I read the draft again on my laptop, my fingers tracing the lines as though the screen carried the weight of ink. Maternal longing pulled at me memories of holding Camilla as a child, of birthdays and graduations, but distrust pressed harder. For the first time in years, tears came. Not loud or wrenching, just a quiet stream I allowed to fall while the city lights blurred outside the glass. I let myself cry once, then drew a steady breath and closed the file. I would not fold. My strength lay not in striking back, but in holding the line I had drawn, and I carried that resolve with me into the first days of the new year. January arrived with a sharp wind off the Atlantic, but inside the small hall on Congress Street, warmth gathered in the form of neighbors, city officials, and advocates. I had taken a portion of my estate money that once propped up Camilla's comforts and placed it into a legal aid fund for seniors. Too many of us had been cornered into signing away property, co-signing debts, or yielding control to children who forgot that trust is not a birthright. At the ribbon cutting, I stood at the podium, the brass scissors heavy in my hand. My voice carried across the rows of folding chairs. Respect is the inheritance I demand. Not houses, not bank accounts, not shares in a company. Respect. And it begins with protecting those who gave everything long before anyone else had anything to lose. Applause rose, steady and sincere, and I felt Henry's presence as though he were standing just behind me, nodding. That night, back in my apartment, I opened the storage trunk I hadn't touched in years. Inside lay Henry's old chair, the one he had insisted be mine after he passed. I dragged it beside the window that overlooked the cove, its wood polished by decades of use. It creaked under my weight, but it held steady. On the wall, I hung a small shadow box I had ordered days before. Inside rested a single brass key from the Ogunquit condo, no longer tied to Camilla's name. I had labeled it simply, Boundaries. I set a simple dinner on the table: soup, bread, a glass of the Bordeaux I had refused to open on Christmas Eve. I raised it quietly, not to anyone in the room, but to the air itself, to the journey from humiliation to resolve. For the first time in a long while, I sat at the head of my own table, not waiting for permission, not yielding to anyone's claim. Alone, yes, but whole. As the snow fell outside and the light dimmed, I knew the next chapter of this story would not be written in bitterness, but in the strength to guard what remained mine. By March, the snow had melted into gray slush, and Portland smelled faintly of salt and thaw. Camilla's message came unexpectedly, clipped and formal. "Can we meet against Arthur's advice?" I agreed, but only in public. A cafe on Middle Street, bustling enough to keep tempers in check, gave us neutral ground. I arrived early, choosing a seat by the window where gulls circled above the harbor. The hum of conversation around me steadied my nerves. When Camilla entered, she looked thinner, her coat too loose, her face worn with sleepless nights. She carried no bravado, only the unease of someone unsure of her footing. "Mother," she began, sliding into the chair across from me. "I've been under so much stress. Ethan's hours. Margot's expectations." I snapped. That night wasn't me. Her words came rehearsed, but her eyes darted toward the floor. Unwilling to meet mine, I listened, silent, letting her fill the air with excuses dressed as explanations. When she paused, I reached into my bag and laid a manila folder on the table. Inside was a typed contract Arthur and I had prepared weeks earlier. "This," I said, pushing it across to her, "is not punishment. It's the lease on respect." Her hands trembled as she unfolded the pages. The terms were clear: a written apology to Lena and Caleb, a repayment schedule for the guarantees I had covered, mandatory counseling sessions documented by a therapist, and a strict clause that Margot Hastings would never again touch family finances or decisions tied to me. Camilla's lips pressed tight. "You'd make me sign this calmly." I held her gaze. "Sign it, or walk away. Those are the choices." For a long moment, she sat frozen, the cafe noise blurring around us. Finally, she folded the papers back into the folder and pushed it toward me. "I can't," she whispered, then rose to leave. I watched her walk out into the pale afternoon light, her figure swallowed by the crowd. Pain tugged at my chest. Maternal instinct never truly dies, but pride steadied my spine. Some lines, once drawn, could not be erased, and I carried that truth with me as I turned toward the window. The gulls still circling above the thawing harbor,